10 years ago, I discovered my parents had secretly drained my entire college fund. $23,000 I had worked summers to help build, to bail out my brother Marcus after his third felony arrest. They chose his freedom over my future without even telling me. So I vanished, completely changed my name to Serafina Vale, and built a successful life they knew nothing about. Now Marcus is in trouble again, and they are desperately trying to find me. But this time, I hold all the cards, and they have no idea what is coming. Call to action. Before we dive into this family revenge story, drop a comment, letting me know where you are watching from. I love connecting with viewers worldwide. If you are ready for a wild ride of family betrayal justice and the sweetest karma payback, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story will show you exactly why blood does not always mean loyalty. Trust me, you will not want to miss how this unfolds. Growing up as the youngest in the Hartwell family, I always knew Marcus was the golden child, but I never realized how deep that favoritism ran until it destroyed my future. My parents, Robert and Linda Hartwell, had always made excuses for Marcus. When he got arrested for petty theft at 16, when he dropped out of high school, when he started dealing drugs in his early 20s. But I was the responsible one, the straight-A student working part-time jobs since I was 14, saving every penny for college. The college fund was supposed to be sacred. Dad had opened it when I was born, and over 18 years between their contributions and my own earnings from babysitting, lawn mowing, and working at the local grocery store, we had built it up to $23,000. It was not enough for Harvard, but it would cover most of my tuition at the state university, where I had been accepted into their pre-law program. I discovered the truth on what should have been the happiest day of my life, my high school graduation. I had gone to the bank to check the account balance before transferring the funds for my fall tuition payment. The teller, Mrs. Henderson, who had watched me make deposits for years, looked confused when she pulled up the account. "Honey, this account was closed 3 months ago," she said gently, probably seeing the color drain from my face. "That is impossible," I whispered. "There should be over $23,000 in there." She showed me the screen, and there it was. A complete withdrawal on March 15th, just 2 months before graduation. The authorization signature was my father's. I felt like I was going to throw up. I drove home in a daze, my graduation cap and gown still in the back seat from the ceremony that morning. When I walked into the house, my parents were in the living room with Marcus, who looked healthier than he had in months. He was actually smiling, something I had not seen since his last arrest. "There is our graduate," Mom said brightly, but something in her voice sounded forced. "We are so proud of you, sweetheart." I stood there looking at the three of them, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Marcus's improved mood, the hushed phone conversations I had overheard, the way my parents had been avoiding eye contact with me for weeks. "Where is my college money?" I asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus actually had the audacity to look away, suddenly very interested in his phone. Mom started crying before Dad even opened his mouth. "Sweetheart, we can explain," Dad began, but I cut him off. $23,000, Dad. Where is it?" Marcus was facing serious time. Mom sobbed. "The lawyer said without bail money he could be looking at 5 to 10 years. We could not let that happen to our boy." Our boy. Not their son, our boy. As if Marcus was somehow more theirs than I was. "That was my future," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I worked for that money. I earned it." "We will pay it back," Dad said quickly. "We just need time. Marcus is getting his life together, he has a job lined up, and we can rebuild the fund." Marcus finally looked up from his phone. "Look, I am sorry, okay? But I would have done the same thing for you." That was when I snapped. "You would have done the same thing, Marcus. When have you ever sacrificed anything for me? When have you ever even had $23,000 to sacrifice?" "Do not be dramatic," he said, rolling his eyes. "You are smart. You will figure something out. Take out loans like everyone else." The casual dismissal in his voice, the complete lack of remorse, the way my parents just sat there nodding like what he said made perfect sense. That was the moment I realized I was not really part of this family. I was just the backup plan, the reliable one who could handle disappointment, because I always had before. "You are right," I said calmly, and I saw relief flood their faces. "I will figure something out." But what I figured out was not what they expected. Over the next 3 days, I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out student loans, and got approved for a work-study program. I also did something else. I started planning my exit from the Hartwell family. The final straw came a week later when I overheard Mom on the phone with her sister, Aunt Carol, explaining the situation. "She is being so selfish about this," Mom was saying. "Marcus could have gone to prison, but all she cares about is college. She has always been jealous of the attention Marcus gets, and now she is punishing us for protecting him. I raised her better than this." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to stick around and be the family scapegoat anymore. I was not going to be the responsible one who cleaned up Marcus's messes while he got all the love and support. I was done. I spent the summer working double shifts and saving every penny I could. I applied to universities in different states under my full name. My first name was actually Serafina, though my family had always called me by my middle name, Anne. When I left for college that fall, I told my parents I would see them at Christmas. It was the last honest thing I said to them for 10 years. The week before I left, I found out the real reason Marcus needed bail money. He had not just been arrested for dealing drugs. He had been caught selling to minors outside a high school. My parents had bankrupted my future to keep a predator out of jail, and they had the nerve to call me selfish for being upset about it. That knowledge sat in my stomach like a stone as I packed my few belongings and prepared to leave everything I had ever known behind. I was 18 years old, completely alone, and about to disappear from my family's life entirely. But I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. One that would eventually come full circle in ways none of us could have imagined. The transformation from Anne Hartwell to Serafina Vale was not just about changing names. It was about rebuilding myself from the ground up. At college, I threw myself into my studies with the fury of someone who had something to prove. I worked 3 part-time jobs, lived on ramen and determination, and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business and a minor in criminal justice. My professors noticed my drive. One of them, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, became my mentor and helped me land an internship at a prestigious consulting firm in Chicago. For 10 years, I built a life my family knew nothing about. I worked my way up to senior consultant, specializing in financial fraud investigation. The irony was not lost on me. The daughter whose college fund had been stolen became an expert at catching people who steal money. I bought a beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park, drove a BMW I had paid for in cash, and had a retirement fund that already exceeded what my parents made in a year. But the real power move came 5 years into my new life, when I hired a private investigator to keep tabs on the Hartwell family. Not because I missed them, but because I needed to know if Marcus was still ruining lives. What I discovered was both satisfying and horrifying. Marcus had been arrested 4 more times since I left. Twice for dealing, once for assault and once for fraud. each time my parents had mortgaged and remortgaged their house to pay his legal fees. They had burned through their retirement savings, Dad's pension fund, and even Mom's inheritance from her mother. They were now living paycheck to paycheck, their house underwater on the mortgage, all to keep Marcus out of prison. Meanwhile, they had been telling people I was going through a phase and would come home eventually. They had never even tried to find me, assuming I would crawl back when I needed something. The investigator told me they still set a place for me at Christmas dinner every year, as if I was just running late. The breaking point came when I received a call from my investigator in March. Marcus had been arrested again, this time for embezzling $40,000 from the nonprofit organization where he worked. But this was different. This time, there was a victim who was not going to stay quiet. The nonprofit was a charity that provided meals for homeless veterans. Marcus had been skimming donations for months, money that should have fed people who had sacrificed for their country. The director, a former Marine named James Rodriguez, was not interested in quiet settlements or family excuses. He wanted prosecution, and he wanted Marcus to face the full consequences. My parents were desperate. According to my investigator, they had already been turned down by 3 bail bondsmen and 2 banks. Their credit was destroyed. Their house was in foreclosure proceedings, and they had nowhere left to turn. That was when they started actively searching for me. They hired their own private investigator, posted on social media, even called the university, trying to track down their missing daughter. The desperation in Mom's Facebook posts was almost pathetic. Please share. Looking for our daughter Anne Hartwell, missing for 9 years. Family emergency, need to reach her urgently. I watched all of this unfold from my glass office 40 floors above Chicago, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. They had made their choice 10 years ago when they picked Marcus over me. Now they were facing the consequences of that decision, and suddenly they remembered they had another child. But then my investigator brought me something that changed everything. "Serafina," he said during our monthly call. "I found something you need to see about Marcus's current case." He emailed me a police report that made my blood run cold. The investigation into Marcus's embezzlement had uncovered something much bigger. The detective had been digging into Marcus's financial history and discovered a pattern going back 15 years. Marcus had not just been stealing from the veterans charity. He had been running scams and thefts for over a decade, always with my parents cleaning up behind him. But buried in the financial records was a transaction that stopped me cold: $23,000 deposited into Marcus's account on March 16th, 10 years ago. One day after my college fund had been withdrawn for bail. Marcus had never been in jail when they took my money. The bail story was a complete lie. I stared at that bank record for an hour, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. I called my investigator back immediately. "I need you to dig deeper," I said. "Find out where Marcus really was in March 10 years ago." The answer came back within a week, and it was worse than I had imagined. Marcus had not been arrested at all. He had been in Las Vegas gambling and partying with my college fund money. The bail story had been a complete fabrication designed to cover up the fact that they had just handed him my future to blow on blackjack and bottle service. My parents had not just chosen Marcus over me. They had actively participated in stealing from me and then lied about it. For 10 years, I had carried the pain of being abandoned for my criminal brother's legal troubles. The truth was so much worse. They had abandoned me for nothing more than his entertainment. That night, I sat in my apartment looking out at the Chicago skyline, and I made a decision. It was time for the Hartwell family to meet Serafina Vale. I started with a simple phone call to Detective Rodriguez, the man investigating Marcus's latest crimes. Detective, my name is Serafina Vale, and I am a financial fraud investigator. I believe I have information relevant to your case against Marcus Hartwell. What kind of information? He asked. Evidence of a 15-year pattern of theft and fraud, including the embezzlement of $23,000 from a minor's college fund. I also have documentation showing that the defendant's parents have been knowingly facilitating these crimes for over a decade. There was a long pause. Can you prove that? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Detective, I do not just have proof. I am the victim, and I am ready to testify. The morning I walked into Detective Rodriguez's office was the first time in 10 years I had set foot in my hometown. Chicago had been my sanctuary, but now I was back in the place where Anne Hartwell had died, and Serafina Vale had been born. The irony was perfect. I was returning not as the broken teenager who had fled, but as a successful woman with the power to bring down the people who had destroyed that girl's dreams. Detective Rodriguez was a compact man in his 50s, with graying hair and intense brown eyes that missed nothing. When I introduced myself as both Serafina Vale and Anne Hartwell, his eyebrows shot up. "You are the missing daughter," he said. "Your parents have been looking for you." "I have not been missing," I replied coolly. "I have been building a life they knew nothing about, and now I am here to make sure Marcus finally faces consequences for his actions." I spread 15 years' worth of financial records across his desk, documentation my investigator had painstakingly assembled showing Marcus's pattern of theft, fraud, and manipulation. But the centerpiece was the evidence of my stolen college fund. "This is remarkable work," Rodriguez said, studying the papers. "But I have to ask, why now? Why wait 10 years to come forward?" "Because 10 years ago, I was 18 and powerless," I said. "I believed their lies about bail money and legal troubles. I thought they were choosing his freedom over my future. Now I know they were choosing his entertainment over my future, and that makes all the difference." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here?" "Justice," I said simply. "Marcus has been enabled his entire life, and my parents have been accessories to his crimes. I want them all held accountable." That was when Rodriguez told me something that changed the entire game. "Serafina, there is something you should know. Marcus's case is bigger than just the Veterans Charity. We have been building a RICO case against him for months. We think he is part of a larger organization that targets nonprofits and charities specifically. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, used to prosecute organized crime syndicates. Marcus was not just a petty thief, he was part of something much more serious. We have been looking for someone with your expertise to help us untangle the financial web." Rodriguez continued. "Would you be willing to consult on this case officially?" I had come seeking personal justice, but now I was being offered the chance to be part of something much larger. What would that involve? Working with our financial crimes unit to trace money flows, identify victims, and help us build airtight cases against everyone involved, including your parents if the evidence supports charges. I did not hesitate. Where do I start? The Financial Crimes Unit was led by Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI, a brilliant forensic accountant who had been tracking nonprofit fraud rings for 8 years. When Rodriguez introduced us, I could see her mind working as she connected the dots. "Wait," Chen said, "you are Anne Hartwell." The daughter whose college fund was stolen, Rodriguez mentioned you, but I did not realize you were the same person who exposed the Medicare fraud ring in Illinois last year. My reputation had preceded me. The Medicare case had been front-page news in financial crime circles. I had helped uncover a $50 million scam that sent 12 people to federal prison. That was you, Rodriguez asked, impressed. I remember that case. You saved the government millions. Chen was already pulling up files on her laptop. Serafina, if you are willing to work with us, this could be huge. We have been tracking this nonprofit fraud ring across 6 states. Your brother appears to be what we call a scout. He identifies vulnerable organizations and helps set them up for larger thefts. Over the next 4 hours, they walked me through an investigation that was staggering in its scope. Marcus was not just stealing from the veterans' charity. He was part of a network that had stolen over $3 million from nonprofits across the Midwest. Organizations that fed hungry children, housed homeless families, provided medical care for low-income seniors. All of them had been systematically robbed by people like my brother. The beauty of targeting nonprofits, Chen explained, is that they often have minimal financial oversight and staff who trust easily. These organizations want to believe the best in people because they are trying to help people. But it was Agent Lisa Park from the district attorney's office who delivered the information that made my blood sing with satisfaction. Serafina, based on what you have provided and our ongoing investigation, we are prepared to charge your parents as accessories to fraud and money laundering. They have been moving money and assets to help Marcus hide his crimes for over a decade. What does that mean practically? I asked. Prison time, Park said bluntly. Your mother could face 3 to 5 years. Your father could face 5 to 8 because he was more actively involved in the financial transactions. And Marcus is looking at 15 to 20 years under RICO. The room was quiet for a moment as I processed this information. My parents, who had portrayed themselves as loving, protective people just trying to help their troubled son, were actually criminals themselves. They had not just enabled Marcus, they had actively participated in his crimes. There is one more thing, Chen added. We want to coordinate your family's arrest with a larger sweep of the entire organization. We have been planning this for months, but having you involved changes our timeline. Are you prepared for the media attention this is going to generate? I thought about that 18-year-old girl who had discovered her college fund was gone, who had been called selfish and dramatic for being upset about it. I thought about 10 years of believing my parents had at least been trying to protect Marcus from consequences, only to discover they had been active participants in his criminal enterprise. Agent Chen, I said, I have spent 10 years building a new identity and a successful career. I am not afraid of media attention, especially when it is for bringing criminals to justice. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since I had met him. In that case, we need to discuss timing and strategy. This operation is going to be coordinated across multiple jurisdictions, and we want maximum impact. That was when Chen dropped the final bombshell. Serafina, we have been working with a whistleblower inside the organization, someone who has been feeding us information for months. We were hoping to introduce you two because we think you might work well together. She picked up her phone and made a quick call. Can you come to conference room B? I want you to meet our new consultant. 5 minutes later, the door opened, and in walked someone I had not seen in 20 years. My cousin David Morrison, Aunt Carol's son. The same David who had disappeared from family gatherings when we were kids, who my parents always said had gotten involved with the wrong crowd. Hello, Anne, he said quietly, though I guess it is Serafina now. I stared at him in shock. David, you are the whistleblower. He nodded, looking older than his 32 years. I have been trying to take down this organization from the inside for 2 years. When I found out Marcus was involved and that it connected back to what happened to you, I knew I had to reach out. You knew about my college fund. I knew Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda were lying about something. I just did not know what until I started investigating Marcus's finances for the FBI. Chen was watching this reunion with interest. So you two know each other? We grew up together. I said, still processing this revelation. But I have not seen him since I left home. David stepped forward. Serafina, there is something else you need to know. About why your parents really stole your college fund, and about what Marcus was really doing with that money. It is worse than you think. The room fell silent again, and I realized that despite everything I had learned today, I was still only seeing the tip of the iceberg. My family's betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined, and I was about to discover just how deep it really went. David's words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I felt the familiar chill of betrayal creeping up my spine. After everything I had discovered today, I thought I had reached the bottom of my family's deception. Apparently, I was wrong. What do you mean it is worse than I think? I asked, though part of me was not sure I wanted to know the answer. David looked at Chen and Rodriguez, who both nodded encouragingly. He took a deep breath before speaking. The $23,000 from your college fund was not just gambling money for Marcus. It was seed money for his first major fraud operation. He used your college fund to rent office space, buy equipment, and create fake documentation for a charity scam that netted over $200,000. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My money was used to start his criminal career. That is not even the worst part. David continued, his voice heavy with guilt. Serafina, I was there when it happened. I helped him set up the fake charity. The room went completely silent. Chen, Rodriguez, and Park all turned to stare at David, while I felt the world tilt on its axis. You what? I whispered. I was 22 and stupid, David said quickly. Marcus convinced me it was just a one-time thing that we would make some quick money and then go legitimate. I was working a dead-end job, struggling to pay rent, and he made it sound so easy. Agent Chen leaned forward. David, you never mentioned your direct involvement in the initial fraud. This changes things significantly. I know, he said, looking miserable. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you all for weeks. When I found out Serafina was involved, I knew I had to come clean. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. So let me understand this correctly. My parents stole my college fund, gave it to Marcus, who then gave it to you, and you both used my future to start a criminal enterprise that has been stealing from charities for 10 years. Serafina, please let me explain, David pleaded. Explain what? I snapped. How my own cousin helped destroy my life. How the whistleblower I was supposed to trust is actually one of the original criminals. Rodriguez held up a hand. Everyone needs to calm down. David, you need to explain your current situation with the Bureau. Are you cooperating under immunity? David nodded reluctantly. I have been working with the FBI for 2 years under a cooperation agreement. In exchange for helping bring down the organization and testifying against the other members, I received immunity for my early involvement. I felt betrayed all over again, but this time the betrayal was fresh and immediate. I had walked into this room thinking I finally had an ally, someone who understood what my family had done to me. Instead, I discovered that my ally was actually one of the people who had used my stolen money to hurt others. Did you know? I asked Agent Chen. Did you know he was involved in stealing my college fund when you set up this meeting? Chen looked uncomfortable. We knew David had early involvement with Marcus, but the specifics of the college fund theft were not part of his original statement. This is new information for us, too. Serafina, David said desperately. You have to understand. I have been trying to make this right for years. When I realized what we had started, what it had become, I went to the FBI. I have been risking my life for 2 years to gather evidence against these people. Using information and connections you gained from stealing my money in the first place. I shot back. Agent Park cleared her throat. This revelation does complicate things legally. David, your cooperation agreement specifically stated you had disclosed all criminal activity. Failure to disclose your involvement with the college fund theft could void your immunity. I saw panic flash across David's face, and suddenly I understood the real reason he had wanted to meet me. He was not trying to help me get justice. He was trying to save himself. If I pressed charges for the theft of my college fund, his immunity agreement would be worthless, and he would face prosecution alongside Marcus and my parents. You were never going to help me, I said, the pieces clicking into place. You were hoping to convince me not to pursue charges so your immunity deal would stay intact. That is not true, David protested, but I could see the truth in his eyes. Really? Then why did you wait until now to mention your involvement? Why not tell me up front that you helped steal my money? Chen was furiously taking notes. David, I think you need to contact your attorney immediately. This conversation needs to stop until we can sort out the legal implications. But I was not done. 10 years of anger and betrayal were pouring out of me, and David had become the target for all of it. You know what the really sick part is, I said, my voice rising. For about an hour today, I thought I finally had someone who understood. Someone who knew what this family was really like and wanted to help me get justice. Instead, I find out you are just another person who used me and threw me away. Serafina, please, David said, reaching toward me. I stepped back sharply. Do not touch me. Do not talk to me. You are just as bad as Marcus and my parents. Actually, you are worse because at least they never pretended to be on my side. Rodriguez stood up. I think we need to table this discussion until David can speak with his attorney. Serafina, are you willing to continue consulting on this case without David's involvement? I looked around the room at the 3 federal agents who had promised me justice, only to discover that their key witness was one of the people who had wronged me. Everything felt contaminated now, tainted by David's deception. I need time to think, I said finally. This changes everything. Of course, Chen said. But Serafina, I want you to know that David's involvement does not change the strength of our case against Marcus and your parents. We have plenty of evidence independent of his testimony. Maybe, I said, but how do I know there are not other surprises waiting for me? How do I know I can trust any of you? It was a fair question, and no one in the room had a good answer. I gathered my purse and headed for the door, feeling more alone than I had in years. Serafina, wait, David called after me. I know I messed up, but I really am trying to make this right. The information I have provided has already helped convict 6 people and recover over $1 million for victims. I paused at the door and turned back to look at him. David, you helped steal my college fund and then built a career as an FBI informant on the connections you made from that crime. You have been making things right for yourself, not for the people you hurt. There is a difference. As I walked out of the federal building, I realized that my quest for justice had become infinitely more complicated. I had thought I was fighting against my family's crimes, but now I discovered that the fight included people I had trusted. The question was, did I have the strength to take on everyone, including the federal agents who might be more interested in protecting their case than in getting me justice? I spent 3 days in a hotel room staring at the ceiling and trying to decide whether to walk away from the entire situation. The revelation about David had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. For 10 years, I had built my life on the principle that I could trust myself and my own judgment. Now I was questioning everything. On the 4th morning, there was a knock on my hotel room door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes holding a manila envelope. "Miss Vale, my name is Margaret Rodriguez, Detective Rodriguez's mother. Could I speak with you for a few minutes?" I opened the door cautiously. "How did you find me?" "My son told me what happened with your cousin. He also told me about your college fund and what your family did to you." She held up the envelope. "I have something I think you need to see." Against my better judgment, I let her into the room. Margaret Rodriguez had the bearing of someone who had faced hardship and come through it stronger. She sat down at the small table by the window and gestured for me to join her. 23 years ago, she began, my husband was killed by a drunk driver. The insurance settlement was supposed to secure our future. Pay for my son's college, cover the mortgage, give us stability. Instead, my brother-in-law convinced me to invest it in what he said was a guaranteed real estate deal. My heart sank. It was a scam. Every penny, she confirmed. $58,000 gone. My brother-in-law disappeared and I was left with nothing. I had to work 3 jobs to keep the house, and my son had to pay his own way through college and the police academy. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. But I never stopped looking for my brother-in-law. And last week, my son's investigation into your brother led me to something interesting. She spread the papers across the table, and I recognized bank records and corporate filings. At the top of the stack was a photograph of a man in his 70s with familiar eyes. "That is Ramon Rodriguez," Margaret said. "My former brother-in-law who has been living under the name Robert Morrison for the past 20 years. I studied the photograph more closely, and my blood went cold. Morrison, as in David Morrison. David Morrison is Ramon Rodriguez's grandson," Margaret confirmed. "The son of the daughter Ramon abandoned when she was 16, who later took her mother's maiden name of Morrison." The pieces were falling into place in a way that made me feel sick. "You are saying David is related to the man who stole your family's money." "More than that," Margaret said grimly. "I am saying that David has been working for his grandfather this entire time. The FBI thinks David is their informant, but really he has been feeding information to Ramon, so the organization could stay one step ahead of law enforcement." She pulled out another document, a bank record showing regular transfers from an account owned by David Morrison to an account owned by Robert Morrison. Every month for 2 years, David has been sending money to his grandfather. The FBI thinks he is living on his police salary and informant payments, but he has been getting much more than that from the criminal organization. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I had been hit by a truck. So when David approached me yesterday, pretending to want to help, he was probably gathering information to report back to his grandfather, who could then warn your parents and brother about the investigation. Margaret finished. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why are you helping me?" Margaret's expression softened. "Because 23 years ago I was where you are now. I was a woman who had lost everything to family betrayal, and I had no one to help me fight back. I do not want that to happen to you." She pulled out one final document. Also, because I think we can help each other. I have been building a case against Ramon Rodriguez for over 2 decades. Your family's crimes are connected to his organization, which means we have a common enemy. The document was a detailed organizational chart showing the structure of the nonprofit fraud ring. At the top was Ramon Rodriguez, using the alias Robert Morrison. Below him were regional coordinators, including Marcus Hartwell. And serving as the intelligence coordinator feeding information about law enforcement investigations was David Morrison. "This is incredible," I breathed. "You have been tracking this organization for 23 years. "I started as a victim seeking justice," Margaret said. "But over the years, I became something more. I learned accounting, computer forensics, and investigation techniques. I built relationships with other victims and started tracking the organization's movements. The FBI does not know I exist, but I have been gathering evidence against these people for decades." She opened her laptop and showed me a database that was staggering in its comprehensiveness. Financial records, victim testimonies, property transfers, phone records. It was a 23-year investigation conducted by one woman seeking justice for her family. "Margaret, this is professional-level detective work. How did you learn to do all this? When the system fails you, you learn to build your own system," she said simply. "I worked nights and weekends, took online courses, built relationships with private investigators and retired law enforcement officers. I made it my life's work to bring down the people who destroyed my family." I looked at the evidence spread across the table, and for the first time in days, I felt hope. "What do you need from me?" "Your expertise in financial fraud investigation and your access to the federal task force," Margaret said. "Together, we can expose David's real role and build a case that will take down the entire organization, including your family. The FBI is not going to believe that their star informant is actually a double agent," I warned. Margaret smiled for the first time since entering my room. "They will when we show them the evidence. I have been documenting David's communications with his grandfather for months. I have recordings, financial records, and documentation of information being passed from the FBI investigation to the criminal organization." She handed me a flash drive. "Everything is on here. 23 years of evidence against Ramon Rodriguez's organization, including proof that David Morrison has been compromising the federal investigation from the beginning." I held the flash drive in my hands, feeling its weight. This was not just evidence. This was justice. Not just for me, but for hundreds of victims across 2 decades. "Margaret, if we do this, we are taking on not just my family and the criminal organization, but also the FBI agents who have been unknowingly compromised. This could get dangerous." "Serafina," she said firmly, "dangerous is letting these people continue to hurt families the way they hurt ours. I have been waiting 23 years for someone like you. Someone with the expertise and the motivation to help me finish this fight." I looked at this remarkable woman who had spent over 2 decades seeking justice for her family, and I made my decision. Where do we start? The federal courthouse was packed on the morning Marcus, my parents, and 17 other members of Ramon Rodriguez's organization were sentenced. Margaret and I sat in the front row, watching justice finally unfold after months of careful preparation and investigation. The evidence we had compiled was overwhelming. Margaret's 23 years of meticulous documentation, combined with my financial expertise and the legitimate evidence from the federal investigation, had exposed a criminal enterprise that had stolen over $12 million from charities and families across 8 states. David Morrison had been arrested 3 months earlier when we presented proof of his double agent activities to the FBI. Agent Chen had been devastated to learn that her star informant had been feeding information to the criminals, but she had acted swiftly once presented with irrefutable evidence. David was now facing federal charges for obstruction of justice conspiracy and fraud with his immunity agreement voided. Judge Patricia Stern was known for harsh sentences in financial fraud cases, and she did not disappoint. Ramon Rodriguez, despite his age, received 25 years in federal prison. Marcus received 18 years. The regional coordinators, including several people I had never heard of, received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. When my parents stood before the judge, I felt a mixture of emotions I had not expected. Robert Hartwell, the father who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my math homework, looked frail and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. Linda Hartwell, the mother who had braided my hair and made my favorite cookies, was crying silently as the judge read her sentence. Robert Hartwell, you have been convicted of money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to racketeering. The evidence shows a 15-year pattern of criminal behavior that enabled your son's crimes and facilitated the theft of millions of dollars from charitable organizations. I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison. Linda Hartwell, while your role was less central to the organization's operations, you actively participated in money laundering and fraud for over a decade. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison. As the gavel fell, I felt something I had not expected: peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but a deep sense that the universe had finally balanced itself. The people who had stolen my future were now facing the consequences of their choices. After the sentencing, Margaret and I walked out of the courthouse together. Over the months we had spent building the case, she had become more than an ally. She had become family in a way my blood relatives had never been. "How do you feel?" she asked as we stood on the courthouse steps. "Like I can finally breathe," I said honestly. For 10 years I carried this weight of betrayal and anger. I built a successful life, but part of me was always that 18-year-old girl whose family had abandoned her. Today, that girl finally got justice. Margaret smiled. And what happens now? That was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. The federal investigation had wrapped up, my family was in prison, and my old life as Anne Hartwell was truly dead. But Serafina Vale had work to do. "I have been thinking about that," I said. "The Rodriguez organization stole from hundreds of families over the years. Most of those victims never got their money back, and many of them do not even know there was a criminal organization behind their losses." "What are you proposing?" "A foundation," I said. "Something that helps financial fraud victims navigate the legal system and recover their losses. Something that investigates these crimes when law enforcement does not have the resources." Margaret's eyes lit up. "A private organization dedicated to fighting financial fraud." "Exactly. And I want you to help me run it." 6 months later, the Morrison Vale Foundation for Financial Justice opened its doors in Chicago. Margaret had sold her house and moved to the city, bringing her decades of investigative experience to our small but dedicated team. We had secured funding from several major philanthropies and had already begun working on 12 cases of suspected financial fraud. Our first major success came when we helped expose a Medicare fraud ring that had stolen over $30 million from elderly patients. Our second case recovered $200,000 for a group of veterans who had been defrauded by a fake charity. Each case we solved felt like a victory, not just for the victims, but for that 18-year-old girl who had been told she was selfish for wanting justice. The foundation also became my chosen family, in a way I had never experienced. Margaret was the mother figure I had never really had, supportive, but not enabling, loving, but honest about difficult truths. Our staff included former FBI agents, retired detectives, and other fraud victims who had decided to dedicate their lives to helping others. We were united not by blood, but by shared values and common purpose. I never visited my parents or Marcus in prison. They wrote letters occasionally. Letters I donated unopened to a program that used them to teach literacy to other inmates. I had no interest in their apologies or explanations. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. But I did keep track of their cases through public records. Marcus was not adjusting well to prison life, and had already been disciplined several times for various infractions. My parents, surprisingly, were both participating in educational programs and seemed to be accepting responsibility for their actions. I felt nothing about this information. No satisfaction, no forgiveness, just indifference. The real victory was not their punishment, but what I had built from the ashes of their betrayal. The foundation was helping people get justice. Margaret had become the family I had always needed, and I had finally made peace with my past. On the 2-year anniversary of the sentencing, Margaret and I were working late in the office when she looked up from her computer and smiled. "Serafina, do you ever wonder what would have happened if your parents had not stolen your college fund?" I considered the question carefully. I probably would have become a small-town lawyer, married someone local, and lived a perfectly ordinary life. I never would have developed the expertise to catch financial criminals, never would have met you, never would have started the foundation. So, in a strange way, their betrayal led to something better. Not better, I corrected. Different. They still destroyed that 18-year-old girl's dreams, and that was wrong. But that girl grew up to become someone who could protect other people from the same kind of harm. I guess that is its own kind of justice. Have you ever had to choose between forgiving family and demanding justice? I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions, even when it hurts. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one and love hearing your stories of overcoming family betrayal. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of justice and redemption. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they can survive family betrayal and build something beautiful from the aftermath. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember, your worth is not determined by how your family treats you, but by how you choose to treat yourself and others. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you are born into, and there is incredible power in building a life dedicated to justice and truth.